So, it's good to have everybody. My name is Denny Paul May. I'm the due process consultant here at KVEC. How many special education teachers are in this group? Have any special education teachers? Everybody regular ed. Okay, so kind of framing the discussion a little bit around that. Certainly, progress monitoring is something that crosses the lines. Okay, I won't bore you too much with who I am or what I've done, but you know, I've been a special education teacher. I was a regular ed teacher for one semester, all those years ago, one semester, and decided to go special ed. Went back, got schooling, ended up being a diagnostician, which was achievement testing for special education programs in Pike County, and then went on to then become a coordinator and a resource teacher for special education in Pike County. Did 18 years there, and then jumped over to Pikeville Independent, where I did a 10-year stint as director of special ed with Pikeville Independent, at which time I retired. Now, all that time, I also coached basketball. So I was a high school basketball coach for like 29 seasons. And so busy, yes. Leave things undone, yes. Sometimes too many irons in the fire, you know. But certainly it's great to have you. Where are you guys from? I saw you Jenkins, right? Jenkins, and what we got here? Hazard Independent or Perry? Paintsville, Jenkins, Perry, McGoffin, and Leslie. I remember Leslie, she was in the first session. So this is really a companion to the first session. We talked about IT. We talked about how when you write goals, and if you really want to apply this to the RTI or MTSS systems that are in place or should be in place in your districts, it's all about skills and measuring those skills and seeing if students make progress. That's what progress monitoring is about, right? So, you know, there's certain things that have to go on in the MTSS program and the RTI program that really kind of mirror what goes on once a student becomes a student with a disability and receives special design instruction and gets an IEP. It's really basically the same kinds of things. So some of the rules, some of the information you're going to get is going to be kind of carry over. So you can apply it to your own jobs as a regular ed teacher, but it also is going to help you if you have students with disabilities in your classroom to be able to make decisions for them in terms of your delivery of special design instruction or helping to deliver special design instruction with that special ed teacher. How many of you have been in a situation where you have you're the classroom teacher and you've got a special education teacher that comes in with you? Anybody been in that situation? Okay, so you see what I'm talking about? You say, oh, well, it's good to know these things. Okay, so we'll talk about some things. We'll go pretty quickly. We've got some activities involved here. But if you need me to stop, please stop me and ask me. So wait a minute. What are you talking about? Because this is a little bit deep in terms of measuring student performance, okay? But it's not rocket science, so we can all do it, right? We can all do it. Okay, so really the journey of progress monitoring. Welcome, my friend from Owsley. So we really start with student performance data. Okay, how's the student doing on interventions, right? How's the student doing on state and district testing? How's the student doing on classroom performance within, like, working within the standards? How far are they away from what's expected? Similar age performance. And so when you start to think about IEP development, you look at that student performance data, and it's either going to tell you the student needs to be in a tier, or they need to be a student with a disability Maybe they've got the criteria that meets that, they need specially designed instruction, and they have what we call an adverse effect on their educational performance. And so, in order to be eligible for special education in Kentucky, you have to meet the criteria of the 14 disability categories. Any of those 14 disabilities, you've got to meet that criteria. Then you have to show that you're significantly and consistently below a similar age peer. Okay? You're below that. And then, on top of that, is there an adverse effect on your performance within the general curriculum? Are you not able to keep up with the pace, with the rigors of the general curriculum? And so as a special ed teacher, they're charged with not only closing those gaps on those skills, but also providing access to that content, because all students get core instruction in Tier 1. All students have the right by law to have universal design for learning elements in their lessons. All students have the right to have differentiated instruction, which Carol Ann Tomlinson wrote the book on. Okay? So if you want to look, you want to write that down, that's somebody you need to Google. Okay? It's somebody you need to explore, because she's got a ton of things where you provide differentiation. So universal design, differentiation, and then all students, if they're not making progress, can be students that fall into Tier 2 and Tier 3. This includes special ed students as well, because when you're doing MTSS or RTI, Tier 2, Tier 3, and if you qualify in one particular area, you still have the right to also receive RTI in other areas. Okay? You got a kid that's SLD in reading, and they're a little bit more, their performance is a little bit less or deficient in terms of similar age peers. They can have RTI in math and have reading services. You see what I'm saying? So all students get all of those things. And then when you get to the IEP, who gets the IEP? It's those kids that need specially designed instruction. Something intentional, a little deeper, and they have an adverse effect on their educational performance that we can show that they're significantly and consistently below what's expected at a particular grade or particular age. I should say not grade, age. So, when we look at student performance data and the kids in the program, they get IEP, and we have to come up with some of their priority skills that we're going to work on. IEP, priority skills. And in the last session, we talked about what goes in present level. That's the first page that tells us how the student's doing, what they currently know, what they can do in all of these different areas, like communication, academics, health, vision, hearing, and motor. And then you've got social emotional, and then you've got general intelligence, you've got transition, all those pieces. We have to determine all those pieces and if they're commensurate in an area, we can check a box. But if they're not, we have to come up with things like their strengths and what their needs are. And when we determine what their needs are, then we have to determine what their baseline is on that skill. We have to turn that verb or that behavior that we see count here in time into a quantifiable measure and turn it into a number that goes in the present level. So we start with a baseline. So if a kid can't read any words at the second grade level from the Dalton's word list, baseline is 0. Does that make sense? And we give them some instruction, we give them another test, and maybe they get 2 or 4. That's a data point. Then we give another measure. We give some more instruction, another measure. A week later, he gets a 5. Then we do another measure, he gets a 6. Then he gets another 4. And after we get 4 to 6 of those data points, we average them. And we're going to see that here in our presentation, how you do mean and how you do median. And we average those and we get a baseline. So if we get 4, 4, 6, 5, we're somewhere in the 4 range, right? 4 or 5 range, right? Do the math. You would add all those together and take an average by dividing by the number of data points that you have. And we're going to see that here in just a second. But we write that baseline in, And then we start instruction, and we do programming. We give special design instruction, and while we're doing that, we're taking data points based on the goals that we've written for that student. So once we determine what the baseline is, the baseline kind of drives what our goals are going to be, and then you can see this is a journey. We move, and the annual goal is going to have a percentage that we're going to strive to reach. But our present level is going to have a baseline percentage that's going to be our starting point. So we're going to have a baseline starting point, and we're going to have a percentage that we're going to try to reach over here at annual goal, right? So I'm visual, so I like to see things. I'm a visual learner. I have to see it, and then I have to work with it. That's very important when you're working with instruction. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about this progress called, or this journey called progress monitoring. It's not going to work. Maybe it might help if I turn it on. Maybe. Yep, there we go. So there's another. Like I said, I like pictures. I like graphics. This is just kind of a circle. I got a copy of this. And so, we see this is straight out of the IEP guidance document. The IEP guidance document is like our how-to manual in special ed. Okay, this is a document. It's about 90-some pages long. You can get a copy of it on KDE's website, right? You got one over there somewhere. Yeah, she's got a copy. So it looks like this, and it's all of our how-to. It tells us how to progress monitor. And so we're going to pull some things out of that to show you that it's a cyclical process, that we start progress monitoring on annual goals almost immediately, okay? You got your first IEP, you've got goals that tell you how often you're going to take data, the tool you're going to use to take the data, and the behavior that you're going to measure, okay? And it's going to start a process. And we're going to say we may take data weekly. Well, then we're going to take data weekly. And we're going to let that data do some things for us. So let's talk about this for a second. Why do we do progress monitoring? Okay? Progress monitoring, what is it, first of all? It's an ongoing process of collecting data and analyzing that data, and it does some things for us. The purposes of progress monitoring are to measure and report progress, determine the effectiveness of our instructional services, and then guide instructional decisions and make adjustments to our specially designed instruction, and determine current level of academic or behavior performance, and then provide data for reevaluation process, and then to determine if the student continues to meet eligibility. Because we have this thing, if we don't need specially designed instruction any longer, if we've met all of our goals, then we're not a candidate for being in special education. Okay? You have to have an adverse effect, and you have to need specially designed instruction. So if our data says we don't need special designed instruction anymore, guess what? We're no longer eligible. We're just a 504 kid out there with some issues of protection under, we've got a disability, but we don't need special design instruction because the gap has closed based on what we've provided. Okay? So our purpose is really, and then I can sum it all up. There's this case called Andrew F. Andrew F. was a case where the student was autistic, and this district was copying and pasting his goals and not getting his parents involved in the development of the IEP, and they just pretty much babysat him. His behavior got worse as the years went by, and they didn't have two things. They didn't have any progress data, and they didn't have any parent involvement in the development of the IEP. And they had IEPs for years and years and years that had the same goals from like age 9 to age 3 to age 11. So guess what? Went to Supreme Court. Supreme Court said basically two things: no progress data. So you cannot provide the free appropriate public education that you're supposed to provide for students with disabilities unless you have progress data. So we progress data, yes, to help us with instructional decisions, yes, to tell if the student's making any progress, yes, to determine if there are any needs of reevaluation, yes, to determine if there's still an adverse effect on educational performance. But in an overall sense, if we don't have data, told you last time, what did I say? No data, write the what?
Check.
Write the check, right? If you go to court of law and you haven't provided the student with the instruction and some data to support that you provided it, that's your evidence. That's your evidence. And so the evidence was not there in injury. And so guess what? That district had to pay millions of dollars in compensatory education services for that student and punitive damages and pay for attorneys. This thing started in 2012 and it went to 2017 before it got to the Supreme Court. Can you imagine how much the attorneys cost? So what I'm saying to you is students really have a civil right to receive progress monitoring in RTI and MTSS, and especially if they're in special education, okay, with an IEP. So all of those places are appropriate, and it's also telling you, is your instruction effective? Do I need to make some changes to the instruction? And that type of thing. So, we pull these pieces out here as a way of progress monitoring, is to collect, graph, and analyze data to prove we are implementing the IEP or the interventions, if you will, if you're in regular ed, and to prove that we have effective instruction, and to determine the current level of the student, and to guide our instruction, and to tell us whether the student still meets eligibility. That's the reasons. That's why we do progress monitoring. Okay? Is that everybody good with that? Now, why don't you take just a second and put your paper to your pencil? Okay, I know you all are techie people. You're young. You're like my children at home. They sit in one room and another room, and they're in the same house, and they talk to one another on their phone, right? Okay. So, but here's what I want you to do. I want you to write down why we progress monitor, and I want you to make bullets out of these pieces right here. Okay. I want you to make bullets out of those pieces. We want to see it. We want to hear it. And now we're going to write about it. Our whole goal is to move this from your short-term memory to your permanent memory. So one of the ways to crystallize that in your instruction is to have students write about it. The other way that you could have students crystallize this in their memory is to speak about it. So you can write it right there. You can write it right on that slide if you want to. Just rehash it. Make you some bullets. The physical part of writing about it can help you to remember it. So I just say, progress, this is what it is, collect, graph, and analyze. Just prove we're implementing the IEP. To talk to us about how effective our instruction is being, whether or not kids are making progress. To determine their current level. To guide our instructional decisions. And to meet eligibility. Do they still have an adverse effect, and do they still need specially designed instruction? So number one target is we want to know why we progress monitor. That, can we recall at the end of the day today why we do progress monitoring? That's number one target, right? That's our number one learning intention. We're learning about progress monitoring. Now, on page 50 of the IEP guidance document we've been talking about, we're looking at the process for IEP monitoring, okay? We have to identify baseline. We have to prioritize the areas that will generate the most impact, because sometimes students may have 50 different things that they have needs in, right? They may, especially depending on their disability category, they may have processing issues, they may have behavioral issues, they may have daily need issues, they may have socialization issues, they may have reading, math, and writing issues. I'm talking We don't know where to even begin to water this down to the point that we can handle and only have 4 or 5 goals on IP. Brenda and I really get alarmed sometimes when we do progress, when we do record reviews in districts, and we'll go in and they'll have 8 goals. And we're like, how in the world are you doing all that? And still having them in core instruction too, and extracurriculars, and all the things that school's supposed to be. Because the IEP's not intended to be the curriculum, it's intended to be a vehicle by where you close gaps and provide access to the instruction for students with disabilities. And so, yeah, we do accommodations, we write goals, and we provide specialized instruction as special ed teachers. So on the other side of the coin, you're sitting there as a regular ed teacher, you may see some of this specialized instruction going on when it's introduced the first time, when new concept's introduced, and then you can pick up as the regular ed teacher and you can reinforce that through your own lessons. It just makes the whole process stronger. And so we have to prioritize, we have to access, we have to generate goals that are going to help us to access and progress in the general curriculum and that are going to remediate skills that are below grade level. That's what we're doing, okay? And then the third piece of that is to write measurable end goals to address those prioritized skills that we've identified through this process, okay? So that's on page 50 of your AP guidance document. So, introduction to baseline. What is baseline? Okay, let's take just a second and let's consider that question, okay? We've got a series of questions up here, but I want you to work in groups right now, okay? I want you to consider these questions, but I only want you to consider the first question, okay? I want you to consider what is baseline. Write down what you think baseline is in a silo. What does that mean? You work on your own, you work on your own, and then you're going to compare notes, okay? Same thing over here. You perfectly paired up, got 2, 2, 2, 2. You don't have a partner, so you can join this group, okay? You worked with them last time, so help us out there, Will, and let's make a triad here, okay? You guys work together, so we're considering, write down what we think baseline is, okay? Just write it down on your own, and then I want you to have a conversation with your elbow partner, and I want you to talk to one another about your impressions, your experiences with baseline. What is baseline? Now, I will tell you that sometimes general education people have a different definition than what a special ed is. So that's going to be good. Then we're going to flush this out, okay? All right. Take a couple minutes. So the whole process is to write it, talk to one another, then go back to your silo and rewrite your answer if you learn anything from your elbow partner, and then everyone is not off the hook. Be prepared to share, okay? Be prepared to share. Very good. Okay, we've belabored this point. So why don't you just go ahead and start and tell us what you guys came up with. If we can give everybody your undivided attention, Mr. Johnson, I believe it is? Right, okay.
Starting point, I said this is where they are when they come to you. You get to realize where they are in comparison to other people their age.
Okay, so it's the starting point for instruction.
Yep.
So
Where they are when they get to you before you started the process.
All right, what did you all have? Starting point before any intervention. Okay, so again, that's kind of an elementary, or not an elementary, but kind of an overall educational view of it. That's good though, that's okay, you hold on to that. And yours is kind of that way too, because we're going to dive just a little bit below the surface. What did you all say that was a little bit different? Anything? Start a place to compare data. Now we're talking. So we got to turn that skill into something we can count, right? That we can put a number to, right? Because when we talk about baseline, we're not just talking about this is the starting point. We're talking about this is the graphical starting point. Okay? So we put a number with it. Does that make sense? What did you guys say back here? Current level of performance before instruction. Good deal. So a lot of times they bring it with them, right? They bring it to your classroom, you get them the first time. What did you all think?
see where we're at.
Yes, I think that's perfect. Brenda, did you have anything to add to this?
I was just thinking about what she's talking about. All of you do the universal screeners in the school, so that's a good starting point to prepare the kids to.
Yeah, so like I said, elementary, I keep talking about elementary. General education teachers will think about those screening pieces, okay? And when you turn it into something that's going to measure an MTI or RTI MTSS or on an IEP goal, it goes even a little deeper, okay? We have to think about, okay, a screener's going to tell us that we've got problems in reading. But to write that goal, we have to funnel down and figure out what the particular prioritized skill is that's going to make the difference for that kid, right? What's causing the reading problem? A screener will tell us that and kind of give us a baseline of where they are. Oh, they're behind, right? And just because you're behind doesn't necessarily mean you're a special education student, right? Or you qualify for IEP. So we start with, all right, it's a starting point, but then it's also a skill level. Does that make sense? Where we put a number and we have probed or tested the student and found out consistently over time, maybe 4 to 6 times we give a test to this student and we determine this is where he consistently is performing right now at this point in time. And this is going to be our starting point on this journey to close that gap. Because we're going to say let's just give you an example. If he's reading 10% of the words that are expected of him at the second grade level, we're probably going to say, okay, we're going to look at his disability. We're going to see what his needs are. We're going to see what's causing that reading issue. Can you read? Okay, what's causing it? Phonemic awareness? Is it phonics? Is it fluency? What is it that's causing the issue? And then we're going to break that skill down and we're going to probe it and we're going to work on that skill and provide instruction around that skill. And then we're going to take data points along the way. We're going to come back and we're going to test that skill. And it's very important that you understand it. Whatever you determine the baseline to be, and whatever method of measurement you use, whatever tool you use to measure that behavior, you got to use it through that, right? Because we don't want to compare apples to oranges. We want that same method of measurement applying all the way through. So, when should it be collected? It should be collected prior to the goal development. This is before we write an annual goal. We're going to collect. We're going to look at that reading problem, and we're going to say we're going to probe reading fluency. Okay, how many words can they read correctly per minute? Might be a good one to think about. Okay, how should it be collected? This is going to be our method of measurement, and we've got several that we're going to talk about. Okay, and then to what extent should it be collected? 4 to 6 data points with mean and median being the key here. We got to be able to be. We got to understand that we can't just always take that data and turn it into an average if there are some crazy scores in the mix. Okay?
Before a change of year.
Now that's something a little bit different. Okay? 4 to 6 data points is going to give you a progress check, but then you're going to have to receive intervention probably closer to 6 to 9 weeks. Yeah. So, and then you'll determine how often you're going to take the data in that particular period of time. So, let's look a little deeper. Let's do a little activity. I think the next thing I've got is an activity. So this is a graphic. We're looking at screener data, RTI data, classroom data, progress data, and then we identify the skill needs. This kind of reinforces what we just talked about. And we prioritize that skill data, and then we establish the baseline data. You see what I'm saying? So here's how do we establish what the baseline data is. So let's say that the skill was what we were talking about. How many words can we read per minute on a particular grade level? Okay? And so we would take several measures that. We would take 4 to 6 measures. It wouldn't take you very long to do. But you want to kind of space it out and maybe provide some instructions, see if there's going to be any difference. I'm sorry, you wouldn't provide instruction on a goal yet, right? You would do it before that. So you would establish the baseline data and identify an appropriate tool to measure the skill. That's what you're going to do, okay? So let's look. Like, remember I talked about all those prioritized needs? Kids got needs everywhere. Okay, we got to determine what the most are going to make the most bang for the buck. And so, this is the funneling process we talked about for prioritizing skills. This is a reading sheet from, I think it's from Matt, I believe, and then it tells us the kid's behind in reading. But then when we come down to this level, we look, he's got problems in decoding multisyllabic words, he's got problems identifying affixes, and he's got reading comprehension level. So we look at reading comprehension problems. So we look and say, okay, he's in the 7th grade or the 6th grade, and we have to determine his disability. Okay, we're looking at his disability, and if his disability is such that he's always been really, really, really far behind in reading, we may introduce accommodations at that point. But we also got to determine here, what does he need most to make the most progress and to get him closer to grade level. He might be that kid that's LD in reading, and he does pretty good in everything else. So we might say, okay, reading comprehension is going to be the key for him right here. Okay, so then we would give him a ReadWorks passage where he would read a small passage and answer words or answer questions, comprehension questions. We turn that into a percentage, almost like a permanent product. Okay, so we've got to prioritize the skill. Okay, and we got to know it can't just be enough to know they're behind in reading. We have to know what makes them behind in reading, and then we have to probe it. Okay? So, getting back to probing it. These methods of measurement are what we'll come back to that in a second. I want to get to this activity right here. Okay? So, I want each one of you to do this in a side. I want you to calculate the mean and the median, which is a better representation of a starting point for this student. So the hint, we're going to do a mean, average. We'll add all these pieces together. This is going to be your little activity you're going to do at your desk. All right. We'll add all these pieces together, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 scores. We divide by 5. Okay. Now, we also can do the median piece. What does it say in order to find the median score here? We order from least to greatest and select the middle number. Okay? So why don't you see what those two are? It shouldn't take you very long. Okay? And I'm going to make a point about this data.
Zeros with some celebration. But it's in it. I have an average of we have a median of 35, but I have an average of 35. It's kind of like.
So you order from least to greatest and take the middle number. Okay. So what you guys come up with on the average? 35. And what did you come up with on the median? 45. Pretty simple stuff, right? Pretty simple math. Probably you've had this in the assessment class, maybe in college, I don't know. But here's the point I want you to take. We have to be able to know when to apply this when we're doing progress monitoring. Which one do we use? Do we use the mean or do we use the median? Which one is a better representation? Who's got some thinking around this? Anybody want to dive in and answer this question?
So ask the question again.
Okay, so we've done the work, right? We've done the average, we've done the median.
Mm-hmm.
Which one's a better representation of a starting point for this student? Which one's going to be the better baseline?
The median, and I say that because if you look at all those data set scores, there's a big difference between being in the 40s and the 0. So there's some sort of obvious aberration there. It reminds me, not to digress, it reminds me of my own son who just finished the 9th grade, and so we wanted to get a baseline of where he is at with ACT, right? We expected that he would do well because he's performed well academically and he's a pretty good test taker. So he almost benchmarked as a 9th grader this past winter across all content areas except for English. Got a 14 in English. He's got A's in English, right? And so my wife, who happens to be the world language teacher at Breathitt County High, asked her longstanding colleague, is Brenda laughing at me? Sorry, a little existential. Asked her English, her senior English colleague, can you explain why, our son would do so well on the ACT across all content areas and almost benchmark, and then get a 14 in English? And she said to my wife, was he awake? Was he awake for the test? There's no explanation for that. It's just a complete aberration. So perhaps my answer to your question is, perhaps that 0 is just a complete aberration of some.
So for every one of these, we have to figure out, when we look at the data set, is there an aberration? We would also call that an outlier in the data, right? So when we look at that outlier, what's the outlier? It's 0. So when we look at a set like this, we almost always go to the median score because it's going to skew the data. You know what the average was? What was it, 35? So that's a lot different, 45 or even 40, right? A lot lower. So it skews the data, skews the data, right? And so my next question then would be, if you only had 4 scores and you put them in order, what would you do? 0, 40, 45, and 45. Now what's the median score? Think at your tables for a second. Try to figure that out. What's the median score? You only got 4. You only got 4 in the data set this time.
That's not fair.
42.5.
Huh?
42.5.
How'd you get that?
I added the 2 together.
You teach math.
No.
You add the 2 together in the middle
Together.
and divide by 2, right? You got it? Has everybody got that? So you would go 0, 40, 45, 45, leave this one out, okay? And you would average the 2 that were in the middle. You'd put those 2 together, you'd get 85, and then you'd divide by 2. Okay, and that would give you the median score for an even number data set. Okay, so if you only had 4 data points, and the kid, you were going to get that 5th one, but the kid didn't show up, right? You see what I'm saying? So that's mean and median, and that's very important as far as determining what the baseline is. Okay, that is something that we have to do with every. Got a question? Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were. All right. Any comments?
Very interesting.
Sour looks. Concerned? All right. So. So earlier we talked about behavior. All right. So let me give you an example. When we write goals in special education, we want to make sure that the behavior piece or the skill that we're looking at, we can count, we can see, we can hear, or we can time it. Okay? It's an observable, measurable skill. If I said Johnny's going to increase his math, is that measurable? No, the word increase is not measurable, right? It's too devoid of things that we can observe, right? Increase just not going to be measurable. But if we said Johnny will read and answer questions and get a certain percentage, then we're talking about something we can turn that verb into something quantifiable. Now, there's a trick in special education, into pairing up the method of measurement that you want to use to get the verb measured correctly, okay? For example, you wouldn't put a checklist if you were doing math calculation problems. Rarely would you use a checklist for that, right? A checklist would be like the routine that we were going to introduce this morning. We had a checklist. We're going to do this when we get here. We're going to do this. We're going to do this. We're going to do this. And then we're going to take that checklist and turn it into a countable number. If you got 7 things you got to do, you got 5 trials, you got 3 out of 7 today. We turn that into a percentage, right? We can count it. So that's what we're talking about. And that's eventually what you do with infinite campus goal monitoring. And I know that's way beyond what you're doing right now, but it really basically turns into duration, latency, or an event recording or something you can turn into a percentage, okay, in infinite campus goal monitoring. That's what special ed teachers have to do. You can use all of these different ones. For example, you can use a scatter plot to be able to see frequency, but you eventually got to turn it into a frequency count. Does that make sense? You can use a checklist, but you eventually got to count how many they get right on that in order to turn it into something you can progress monitor, right? Or you can graph on a data set. All right. If you use authentic assessment, you have to pair it with one of these others. It can't stand alone. For example, you've got a student that is working on a group of problems, and the problems, he's making the same mistake, but you can't seem to find what it is, where the thinking's going wrong. And you can only flush it out by interviewing that student, okay? You interview them, but then you put a data set with it, something you can count, right? This one won't stand alone because it does not produce data, right? You got to turn it into something you can measure in order to progress monitor, right? So that's why that won't stand alone. Okay. Let's see. Already done that. Okay. So got some measurable skills here, and this was. This is matching the skill with the potential method for measuring, okay? And then I had this IC method left out here, okay? So let's just go through it together. I was going to let you do it and kind of come up with it, but you're not special ed teachers. You're regular ed teachers, so I'm going to talk you through it, okay? But I think it's useful to understanding the process. So if we're going to read 130 words per minute, that's an oral reading fluency probe, okay? And we use, if you go back to the previous slide, it falls up here. It's a curriculum-based measurement, okay? Comes straight out of the curriculum, comes out of the standards, and it's something we can measure in a minute. Oral reading fluency probe. We do the same thing for a math computation grade. Give the kid a group of math problems. How many can you get done in a timed session? 1 minute. How many do you get correct? Pretty simple stuff, right? And so, here you have follow school procedure for getting lunch. You got 11 steps, okay? There's 11 steps. It's a checklist or a rubric that would tell us how many that you would have to check, all right? And then what you would eventually do here, with this one, you're going to say, this is going to be an event recording because it's going to turn into a percentage, right? How many words you get in a minute, and then you're going to put all those scores together. You take 4 to 6 data points and average them. Or you take 4 to 6 data points and you get the median score, like we just talked about. And then in Infinite Campus, you only have 3 different types of data that you can input. It's either got to be an event recording, a percentage, or it's going to be a duration recording, how long a behavior lasts, or a latency recording, how long does it take the student to respond after a directive or after a prompt. Does that make sense? So, with a rubric or a checklist, we can take that rubric, we can take those 11 steps, see how many they get right over 4 consecutive times or 6 consecutive times, and we can come up with a baseline, right? And what would it be out here? It would again be an event recording or a frequency count. How many times does it get? How much of this does he get correct from this checklist? Does that make sense? All right. So initiating the task within 1 minute of the directive. Latency recording. It's going to be latency recording over here because that's the type of data that you can use, right? So this is you give the student a prompt and you measure how long it takes him to get started. You might also have to accompany this with a checklist because you may have to operationally define what it looks like to be on task or initiating that task. What is your definition of that task? Of being involved or doing that task. You see what I'm saying? So, but really, it's latency here, okay? Attend to task for 7 minutes. We're going to say, we might have to, again, checklist it, operationally define what attend looks like. Sometimes that's hard to do. What does attention look like? What's attend to task? Head down, paper in hand, pencil, paper on it, and we're doing something, right? We're physically working the problem. Is that on task? Yes. Okay. So we've checked that box. Now, how long can he sustain it? What's his starting point? What's his ending point? Where he goes, starts bouncing, right? And so that's a duration recording. And then developing a writing piece, including a topic sentence and some details and a correct punctuation. We use a rubric or a portfolio. What would we put over here? Again, you'd have to be able to look at that rubric and see if there was a point system and can we turn it into a percentage. Okay? Is that all getting with you? Good? Good? All right. Okay. So, when we do baseline, in this progress, when this progress monitoring example, he's got a 20 and a 20 and then a 30 and a 35. We're going to take that average and make it into one data point. And that'll be our starting point. Okay? And so we would say down here, this is the baseline, right? And along this line, you're going to have dates of when you take data points, but you're going to start, and that's going to be indicated, that's your baseline, that's your starting point. And then that's where you consolidate the baseline data into a single data point. Your mean or your median goes right here along this vertical axis. Okay? Now, we've got the baseline. We know the disability. We know the problems the student's got. We can kind of talk about how much progress he's made in the past, especially if he's in a subsequent IEP. We can look at all that information and make a determination in the ARC meeting as to how far we think he can go on that particular skill. So we would set a percentage out here. He starts at 25, and he's going to end up, what's that look like? About 65, right?
70.
Or 70. Okay, thank you.
I can read it better on paper.
Okay. Yeah, I'm having a hard time seeing it too, but I think you're right. I think it is. I think it does correlate to 70 more than it does 65. So we're going from 20, maybe 20, 25 or 20, whatever, 28 to 70. Okay? Baseline, aim line. Okay? Now, when we start to plot and we start to take data points, we're going to say, when we write that goal, the goal is going to say something like, given a Dulce word list, the student will read X amount of words from the Dulce word list, and he's gonna get 90% accuracy on 4 out of 5 trials, and we're gonna use a curriculum-based measure of pro. And we're gonna do it weekly. When we say we're gonna do it weekly, when we look at this example right here, down here, we're gonna have March 1st, March 8th, March 15th, March 22nd. You follow me? And we're gonna have a data point plotted on each one of those. Now, if the kid falls well below the aim line, we have to make an instructional decision. Because he's trending away from getting to this point, right? If he's well above the aim line, we might have a bunch of supports in there. We might have to reduce the supports and make the goal a little harder. We might have things like scaffolds, or we might have graphic organizers, or we might have accommodations included within that circumstance when we write that goal. So we would reduce the support and try to get him closer. What we want to see is to be close to that aim line. Data points around that, we can see him trending. And when we do a trend line, then we see him trending toward reaching the goal. If he's going this direction, we've got to make an instructional change after 4 to 6 data points that are well below the aim line. 4 to 6 data points above the aim line, well above the aim line, we're going to reduce support, or we're going to rewrite a goal. If we rewrite a goal, we have to go back to an ARC meeting, which regular teachers love. Right? If he's well below the aim line, we've got to make an instructional decision. We'll put a vertical line in there to say we changed the specially designed instruction because it's not working. That's how it informs our instructional decisions. That's how it tells us if he's making progress. That tells us, does he still have a disability? All those things that we said were purposes why we're doing this. So you can see visually now how that works. Now here's some rules, and this is some rules you can apply to your MTSS RTI, or this is rules you can apply in any progress monitoring piece. If 3 consecutive data points are below the aim line, make an instructional change. I said 4 to 6, but it's really 3. This is researched, okay? If 4 to 6 data points are above the aim line, adjust supports to generalize to other settings. Adjust the supports, right? If the consecutive data points are neither all above nor all below the aim line, continue. My friend John Looney from up at Big East, who's an assistive technology guru, as well as a really good progress monitor trainer, he's like, to borrow a phrase from the 70s, keep on trucking. Right? Keep on doing what you're doing, because your instruction now, when your dots match up and they're close to that aim line, and your trend line looks like that, and it's headed toward that, meeting that goal, then we're doing what we need to be doing, right? If not, we got changes to make. Now, let me say this. You can make instructional changes without having an ARC meeting, but if you change the goal entirely, and sometimes you have to, because it's when you set it out, the kid did really bad, but he's really a lot smarter. He was fooling around with you or whatever. And you're way up here, you got to write another goal. You got to adjust the expectation, right? And reset the baseline. The rules, these rules are based on a graph with an ascending aim line. If the aim line is descending, then the guidelines are reversed. Okay? If you're using an ascending, you're trying to increase the number, right? When would you use a descending one? When you want to diminish the behavior, right? So if the kid's hitting somebody 10 times in an hour, we want to cut down to 0, right? We would use a descending line. So it's just the rules of progress monitoring are reversed. So when we make decisions about how frequently we're going to take data, A typical school year in Kentucky includes 170 days or 34 weeks. If we take data daily, we have 170 data points. Daily's a little bit too high of a standard for ourselves because if we've not taught a bunch of people to do it, we can miss out and it can skew the data and it can mess our deal up. Kids don't come to school every day. We got attendance issues out there through the wazoo right now. There's all kinds of reasons why you wouldn't do daily, but daily is the one that's going to tell you more about your trend, and you're going to have a stronger trend data set if you do it daily. And daily is one that you would want to do if you had that situation. Like I said, somebody's hitting somebody 10 times, that's a danger. We want to take a lot of data on that. Is our treatment working? Are we reducing it quickly, right? I mean, that's an over-exaggeration. It's a gross example, but you get the point, right? Now, if we do it twice a week, we get 68 data points. The whole idea here is to see that if we do it monthly, we only get 10 data points. That don't even tell us anything, does it? You see the seriousness of saying, well, I've got 15 kids on the caseload, and I've got 15 IEPs, and they've all got 15 goals on each IEP. How in the world am I going to keep up with all that, right? I'm not going to have 15 goals, first of all. But I was blowing that up to let you see that 10 data points in a year is not going to tell you, well, it's not really worth the paper treatment. You want to be somewhere in this range here, weekly or twice a week, is the suggested, right? But just keep in mind, the more data you take, the stronger your trend data is, and the better instructional decisions you'll make.
You said that you don't have to call a meeting if you don't change the goal, but who's the special ed teacher, who do you get to inform?
The special ed teacher would make the instructional change, the special design instruction, that would go in your lesson plans, and you all would talk, you would
So just us.
you'd have a collaboration about these, we're gonna try a different strategy. And then we're gonna indicate what that is in our analysis, and that's what we're getting to.
So especially if you want to teach volunteer people have really,
Right.
you know.
Is that right? Always check with them. She's the guru. So, here's another graph about this. If progress is monitored daily as part of instruction, within 2 weeks, we're gonna know our instruction's effective, okay? And again, daily, 170 points. If we do it twice a week, within a month, we'll know. Within a month, if we do it twice a week, we'll know, we'll have enough data to tell us whether or not that guy's trending in the right way, whether or not our instruction's effective. That's the two big pieces why we do this, right? If we do it weekly or if we do it weekly, it's gonna take us about 9 weeks. So, I've heard the girls in reading say, one data point a week for reading, because you gotta let the instruction take a little bit. You see what I'm saying? So, that's gonna be okay. Then you're gonna have a 9-week analysis, right? You're gonna say, what do we do after 9 weeks? We don't let it go any more than 9 weeks because we want to make that instructional change, right? So, am I out of time? Always, right? All right, let's go one more piece here. I was going to show some things about infinite campus, but that's not really pertinent to the discussion. I wanted to show you at the end of the year-end analysis of progress toward measurable annual goals. You've got data points that are trending toward the goal line here, okay? And the baseline, so you would indicate what the baseline was at the beginning of the cycle, what progress you made toward the attainment of the measurable goal, what SDI you utilized and what strategy you used, and did you make any instructional changes? And an explanation of any significant decreases or increases in the progress, and whether the student regressed or failed to recoup the skills previously taught after breaks of instruction. So we got this thing called regression and recoupment in regular special ed, any kind of progress data. When a kid is out for a long break, we have to give them 6 weeks to see if they can recoup what they lost in that break in instruction. So we gotta take data before and after and compare those two data sets and say, all right, now we're gonna give him 6 weeks more treatment, see if he can get back to that point. If not, he gets extended school year services, where you go in the summer, and that's for maintaining the goals, right? Okay, so, there's what it looks like in Infinite Campus Goal Monitoring. You see your data line, that's your trend line, that blue, and then, I'm sorry, your yellow is your trend line, and your aim line is your green, starting at 45, and you're going, so you can see he's trending well above the aim line there. And this is the analysis that you put with each data point. And if you do this, if regular ed teachers, special ed teachers would do this in their Infinite Campus Goal Monitoring tabs, or their RTI tabs or MTSS tabs, if you would do that, it does the analysis for you, because you're putting in the particulars as you go. It's kind of like keeping that journal of what's going on with that data point. Okay? And so here's an example of what progress monitoring would look like with the analysis. Okay? I've run out of time. I'm getting the look, I'm getting this, the timeout, the eyebrows, all the stuff, right? Thank you all for your time. Progress monitoring, that, it's hard to do it in an hour. It's hard to do it in an hour, but hopefully you'll learn some things about looking at trends, looking at data while we do it, okay? Thank you all. If I had time, I'd make you a test.